For the better part of a decade, the story of American rent was simple, relentless, and deeply painful for anyone trying to find a place to live. Prices went up, then they went up again. Landlords held the leverage, renters had no real options, and every major forecast pointed to more of the same. That was the dominant narrative in housing markets from roughly 2015 through 2022. And then something changed. The construction boom that was triggered by the pandemic era. Demand surge has been delivering new units to the market at a pace that certain cities were simply not prepared to absorb. In market after market across the country, the supply side of the equation has caught up to demand, and in several cities it has blown right past it. The result is a rental market correction that is now very real, very measurable, and accelerating into 2026 in ways that are genuinely alarming landlords who built their entire financial models around the assumption that rent would never stop climbing. Today, we are counting down the 10 American cities where rental prices are falling the hardest, where vacancy rates are climbing fastest, and where landlords are facing a reckoning they did not see coming. We are going from number 10 to number 1, and the data gets more severe as we go. We start at number 10 with Jacksonville, Florida. Jacksonville spent the early part of this decade absorbing an enormous wave of migration from more expensive coastal cities. Population growth was real, demand was real, and developers responded by permitting and building at a scale that the city had never seen before. The problem is that all of that construction is now delivering simultaneously, and the demand wave that justified it has slowed considerably. New apartment units are coming online across the metro area faster than the renter population is growing. Vacancy rates have climbed steadily over the past 18 months, and landlords who acquired properties at peak 2021 and 2022 valuations are now facing asking rents that are measurably below what their underwriting models assumed. Concessions that disappeared entirely during the boom, things like free first month's rent, waived application fees, and flexible lease structures are back on the market in Jacksonville and becoming more common every quarter. For renters, this is a meaningful shift. For landlords carrying debt at elevated rates on properties that are not achieving projected rents, the math is becoming uncomfortable. Moving to number 9, we look at Raleigh, North Carolina. Raleigh built its reputation as one of the hottest rental markets in the Southeast on the back of the technology sector expansion and a steady stream of young professionals relocating from higher cost metros. That reputation attracted developer capital in enormous quantities. The construction pipeline that was approved and funded during the peak of the market has been converting into completed units throughout 2024 and 2025. And the volume of new supply hitting the Raleigh market has been consistently ahead of absorption. Average asking rents across the metro have softened from their peak levels, and the downtown and midtown corridors where luxury apartment supply has been most concentrated are seeing some of the sharpest concession activity. Landlords in those newer Class A buildings are now competing aggressively for a renter pool that has more options than it has had in years. The market has not collapsed, but the direction is clear, and the trajectory is downward. At number 8, we turn to Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville is a particularly instructive case because the rental boom there was driven by two overlapping forces that seemed self-reinforcing for years. Tourism and entertainment industry growth drove demand from younger renters. Corporate relocations drove demand from higher income professionals. Developers funded by investors who believed Nashville's growth story would continue indefinitely build accordingly. What those models did not fully account for was the ceiling on how many people could actually afford Nashville rents after several consecutive years of double-digit increases. Affordability stress has been building in the Nashville market for some time, and as new supply has accelerated, the market has begun correcting. Rent growth has gone negative in several submarkets. Vacancy in newer luxury buildings is running well above the levels that would be considered healthy for investors carrying current financing costs. The landlords most exposed are the ones who purchased in 2021 and 2022 at prices that required strong rent growth to justify, and that rent growth is no longer materializing. Number 7 takes us to Phoenix, Arizona. Phoenix was one of the single most dramatic rental markets in the country during the pandemic surge. Migration from California brought a wave of relatively high-income renters into a market that was priced considerably below West Coast norms, and demand absolutely overwhelmed available supply. But Phoenix also has a development infrastructure that responds quickly to demand signals, and it responded to the pandemic surge with a level of construction activity that has been delivering consequences ever since. The volume of new multifamily units delivered to the Phoenix market over the past 2 years has been among the highest of any major metro in the country on a per capita basis. Vacancy rates have risen sharply. Average effective rents, meaning what landlords are actually collecting after concessions, have fallen meaningfully from peak levels. The days of Phoenix landlords receiving multiple applications within hours of listing a unit are over. Properties that previously rented instantly are now sitting for weeks, and the concession packages being offered to attract tenants have become substantial. We move to number 6 with Charlotte, North Carolina. Charlotte presents a version of the same story that has been playing out across the Sun Belt, but with a local intensity driven by the sheer concentration of new apartment supply in specific corridors of the city. The South End and Midtown areas of Charlotte have seen remarkable volumes of luxury multifamily development, and the renter base capable of supporting those asking rents has not grown at anything close to the same pace as the supply. Landlords in those submarkets are now offering concessions ranging from 1 to 3 months of free rent in some cases, which represents a significant effective rent reduction when spread across a standard 12-month lease. The broader Charlotte metro is seeing rent growth that has gone from strongly positive to flat to negative over the course of the past 18 months, and the trajectory heading into the rest of 2026 does not suggest a recovery in pricing power for landlords anytime soon. At number 5, we arrive in Tampa, Florida. Tampa experienced one of the most intense demand surges of any market in the country during the pandemic relocation wave. Remote workers and retirees both targeted Tampa for its climate, its relative affordability, and its lifestyle offering. Rents surged by percentages that were extraordinary, even by the standards of a hot national market. And then, predictably, supply caught up. The construction pipeline that was greenlit during the peak of the frenzy has been producing completed units in volumes that the Tampa rental market is struggling to absorb. At the same time, the insurance crisis in Florida, which has driven homeowners and property insurance costs to levels that are genuinely shocking in some parts of the state, has added to the total cost of living in ways that have made some renters reconsider Florida entirely. Vacancy is rising, rents are falling, and landlords who stretched to acquire properties at peak 2021 valuations, underwritten on assumptions of continued rent growth, are now staring at cash flow projections that do not work at current market rents. Number 4 brings us to Austin, Texas. Austin deserves its own analysis because the scale of what has happened to its rental market represents one of the most dramatic corrections of any major American city. Austin was the archetype of the pandemic boomtown. Technology companies relocated. Remote workers flooded in. Population growth numbers were staggering, and the city responded with a construction wave so large that it has fundamentally restructured the supply and demand balance of the local rental market. Austin has delivered more new apartment units per capita than almost any other city in the country over the past 3 years. The result has been a rental market where asking prices have dropped substantially from their peak levels. Some estimates put the effective rent decline in certain Austin submarkets at 15 to 20% from peak values. Concessions are widespread. Vacancy is elevated, and landlords who bought multifamily properties in Austin at 2021 and 2022 cap rates, which were historically compressed because of the rent growth assumptions baked into those prices, are now in a genuinely difficult position. The rent growth that justified those purchase prices never arrived at the projected scale, and for many of them, the math simply does not work at current market conditions. At number 3, we look at Denver, Colorado. Denver's rental market correction is rooted in a combination of factors that are somewhat distinct from the pure Sunbelt oversupply story. Yes, new construction has added significant supply, but Denver has also been experiencing population dynamics that have shifted from the strong inbound migration of the mid-2000s to something more complicated. Outbound migration has increased as residents priced out of homeownership have reassessed their long-term plans in a city where both rents and for sale prices remain elevated by historical standards. The tech sector, which was a major driver of high-income renter demand in Denver, has seen employment contraction through rounds of layoffs that reduce the pool of renters capable of supporting luxury asking rents. The combination of rising supply, softening demand, and an affordability ceiling that the market has been pressing against for years has produced a meaningful rent correction in Denver. Landlords in the Cherry Creek, Raleigh, and downtown submarkets are offering concessions and dealing with extended vacancy periods that were simply not part of the local market experience for most of the previous decade. Number 2 on our list is Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta has been one of the most heavily supplied rental markets in the entire country, and the consequences are now being felt by property owners across the metro. The sheer volume of multifamily construction that was approved, funded, and built in the Atlanta market over the past 4 years is extraordinary. Tens of thousands of new units have delivered or are in the final stages of delivery across the metro, and the pace of absorption has been unable to keep up. Market-wide vacancy rates have climbed to levels that are generating real distress among investors who acquired properties during the peak years. Effective rents in many submarkets are down significantly from their highs, and the concession environment is aggressive. Free rent offers of 2 to 3 months are not uncommon in Class A properties trying to stabilize their occupancy. For investors carrying floating rate debt on properties acquired at peak valuations, the combination of higher financing costs and lower achievable rents is creating cash flow deficits that are not sustainable without either a refinancing solution or a sale at a loss. And that brings us to number 1. The American rental market that is experiencing the most severe and structurally significant correction in 2026 is Austin and the broader Texas Triangle. But if we are isolating a single city for the depth and breadth of its collapse, the data points clearly to one market above all others, and that is Austin. The data there is simply the most unambiguous. Rent declines from peak are the steepest among major metros. New supply deliveries relative to population remain among the highest in the country. Concession activity is the most aggressive, and investor distress signals, including rising loan delinquencies on multifamily properties, are the most visible. What we are watching unfold across these 10 cities is not a temporary blip or a minor market adjustment. It is the predictable consequence of a construction cycle that responded rationally to a demand surge that turned out to be partially artificial, partially temporary, and heavily influenced by a zero interest rate environment that has since been completely dismantled. The developers who built these units were responding to real price signals. The investors who funded them were making reasonable assumptions based on the information available at the time. But markets overshoot. They overshoot on the way up, and they overshoot on the correction. The renters who are living through this moment are finding relief that the headlines of 2021 and 2022 suggested might never come. The landlords who stretch their balance sheets to acquire properties at peak pricing are finding out exactly what it feels like when the assumptions underpinning a financial model stop working. If you are a renter in any of these markets or in cities that share similar supply dynamics, the window of negotiating leverage that is opening right now is real, and it will not last forever. Push for concessions. Compare options. Understand that the balance of power in these rental markets has shifted, and use that shift to your advantage. If you are a property owner navigating this correction, the most dangerous thing you can do is hold on to pricing assumptions from 2022 in a market that has moved decisively past them. Price to the actual market. Manage your vacancy. And if you are carrying floating rate debt, understand your refinancing timeline and plan accordingly. The story of American rent has changed. The narrative of endless, unstoppable increases has met the reality of supply economics. And in these 10 cities, that collision is playing out right now in ways that will define the rental landscape for years to come.